Abandoned at the airport, she never expected to board a private jet with a Russian mafia boss. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The departure board at JFK International Airport flickered with an apathy that felt almost cruel, the scrolling yellow letters blurring behind the thick veil of tears gathering in Heather Jameson's eyes. Terminal 4 was a cavernous beast of glass and steel, echoing with the hurried footsteps of thousands of travelers, yet Heather had never felt more singular, more isolated in her entire life. She stood near the check-in counters, her fingers white-knuckled around the strap of a canvas tote bag that contained nothing but a paperback book and a stick of gum. She had no suitcase, she had no boarding pass, she had no wallet. 10 minutes ago, Greg had walked away. It had been a fight over something trivial, the kind of manufactured argument he excelled at, designed to keep her off balance and apologetic. He had accused her of looking at another man in the security line, a baseless charge that spiraled into him screaming at her in the middle of the crowded concourse. When she had tried to hush him, begging him to lower his voice, he had sneered, told her she wasn't worth the price of the ticket to Cabo, and simply walked off with their luggage and her purse tucked firmly under his arm. She had waited, assuming it was a power play, that he would return after letting her sweat for 5 minutes. But 20 minutes had passed, then 30. The realization had set in like a slow-acting poison in her blood. He was gone. He had actually left her here, 2 hours from their apartment, with no money, no identification, and no ride home. Heather pulled her oversized gray cardigan tighter around her body, trying to hide the trembling that had taken hold of her limbs. She felt small, despite the soft curves of her figure that she usually tried to conceal beneath baggy clothing. At 25, she felt like a child lost in a department store, waiting for a parent who had decided they didn't want her anymore. People brushed past her, their eyes sliding over her distress with the practiced indifference of New Yorkers. She was an obstacle, nothing more. A sob threatened to break loose from her chest, a jagged thing she swallowed down painfully. She could not break down here, she had to think, but every thought led to a dead end. She couldn't call a generic taxi without cash, she couldn't call a rideshare without her phone, which was in the purse Greg had taken. Across the concourse, the atmosphere shifted subtly. A change in air pressure that went unnoticed by the masses but was felt by those who paid attention to power. A phalanx of 4 men moved through the crowd, not with haste, but with the inexorable momentum of a glacier. They wore suits that cost more than Heather's entire education, tailored to conceal holstered weapons and maximize intimidation. At the center of this formation walked a man who seemed to absorb the light around him. Viktor Baranov did not look like a man who waited in lines. He was tall, standing well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against the fabric of his bespoke black suit. His face was a landscape of harsh, striking angles, from the sharp blade of his cheekbones to the strong, bearded jawline that looked as if it had been carved from granite. His eyes were the color of the Atlantic in winter, a piercing, icy steel blue that scanned the environment with predatory efficiency. He moved with a lethality that made the air around him feel heavy. He was the pack-hen of the Baranov Bratva, a man whose name was whispered in fear from Moscow to Brighton Beach, and he was currently bored, tired, and ready to leave American soil. Victor's gaze swept over the chaotic sea of travelers, dismissing them as inconsequential noise, until his eyes landed on the woman standing near the information pillar. She was freezing, frozen in place like a statue of misery. It wasn't just her stillness that caught his attention, it was the sheer, devastating vulnerability radiating off her. He slowed his pace, his security detail instantly adjusting to his rhythm. He took in the details his men likely missed. The way her hands shook, the red rimming her dark, expressive eyes, the curve of her hip visible even through the shapeless wool of her sweater. She was beautiful, possessor of a warm, natural beauty that the heavy fluorescent lights couldn't wash out, but she looked broken. Victor stopped. The crowd naturally parted around his group, instinctually giving a wide berth to the predators in their midst. "Sir," his head of security, a brute named Anatoly, rumbled in Russian, "the pilot is waiting." "Wait," Victor commanded, his voice a low, smooth baritone that vibrated in the air. He didn't look away from the woman. He watched as 2 airport police officers approached her. Heather flinched as the uniformed officers stopped in front of her. The taller one, a man with a tired face and a badge that gleamed under the lights, crossed his arms. "Ma'am, you've been standing in this spot for 45 minutes. You're blocking the flow of traffic to the kiosks. Do you have a ticket?" Heather stammered, her voice cracking. I was supposed to, my boyfriend, he has my ticket and my ID." The officer sighed, a sound of supreme annoyance. "So you have no ticket and no identification? Ma'am, you can't be in the departure area. This is for ticketed passengers only." you need to vacate the terminal. Please, Heather whispered, tears finally spilling over, hot and humiliating against her cheeks. I don't have anywhere to go. He took my wallet. I just need to borrow a phone to call my sister. We aren't a charity service, miss, the second officer said, stepping closer, his hand hovering near his belt in a gesture of authority. If you don't leave the premises immediately, we'll have to escort you out for loitering and vagrancy. You're causing a disturbance. I'm not doing anything, Heather cried out, stepping back, fear spiking in her chest. She saw the people watching now, the judgments in their eyes, the abandoned girl, the crazy girl, the problem. That is enough. The voice cut through the noise of the terminal like a knife through silk. It wasn't shouted, but it carried an authority that made the police officers spin around instantly. Viktor Baranov stepped into the circle, his presence looming over the law enforcement officers. His security detail fanned out behind him, silent and menacing. The police officer blinked, looking up at Viktor, intimidated despite his badge. Sir, this is a police matter. Step back. Viktor ignored the command completely. He looked at the officer with a boredom that was more insulting than aggression. There is no police matter here. You are harassing my companion. Heather's breath hitched. She looked up, way up, into the face of the stranger who had just materialized out of the ether. Up close, he was terrifyingly handsome, his scent a mix of expensive leather, sandalwood, and cold winter air. His blue eyes locked onto hers, and for a second the world narrowed down to just him. There was a silent command in that gaze: play along. The officer frowned, looking between the impeccably dressed Russian billionaire and the disheveled, crying woman in the oversized cardigan. Your companion, she said she was abandoned by her boyfriend. She has no ID. A lover's quarrel, Viktor lied smoothly, his accent thick and rich, wrapping around the words. He stepped closer to Heather, extending an arm and wrapping it around her waist. His grip was firm, possessive, and hot through the fabric of her clothes. Heather stiffened instinctively, then melted into the support, her knees too weak to hold her up any longer. She was upset. She misplaced her documents, but she is with me and we are late for our flight. I need to see some identification for her if she's flying, the officer stammered, losing ground. Viktor reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a black passport and a folded document. He handed them to the officer, along with a business card that was heavy, black, and embossed with gold. My diplomatic clearance covers my entourage. She is listed on the manifest for my private aircraft. Unless you wish to detain a foreign dignitary and his staff over a misunderstanding, I suggest you return to your coffee. It was a bluff, or at least a partial one, but it was delivered with such absolute certainty that the officer crumbled. He glanced at the card, saw the name of a massive international holding company, and handed the documents back. My apologies, Mr. Baranov. We just wanted to ensure the lady was safe. She is safe, Viktor said, his voice dropping an octave, the threat unmistakable. She is with me. The officers nodded and retreated, disappearing back into the crowd. Heather stood trembling in the circle of Viktor's arm, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide with shock. Who are you? She whispered. Viktor looked down at her. He saw the fear, but he also saw the relief. He saw a woman who had been discarded like trash, and something dark and possessive uncoiled in his gut. He didn't just want to help her, he wanted to take her. He wanted to show the fool who left her what a mistake he had made. I am the man offering you a way out, Viktor said quietly. He didn't let go of her waist. You have nothing here, yes, no money, no ticket, no way home. Heather shook her head, shame burning her face. No. Then come with me, Viktor said. It wasn't a question, it was an invitation to jump off a cliff. I am flying to Moscow. I have clothes, food, and safety on my plane. I will take you where you need to go, or I will take you away from everything. It is your choice. Stay here and wait for the police to come back, or walk with me. It was insanity. Her mother would have screamed at her. Stranger danger, human trafficking, every warning bell in her head should have been ringing. But when she looked into Viktor's steel blue eyes, she didn't see deceit. She saw a fortress. She saw a man who could burn the world down if he chose to, and he was offering to stand between her and the cold. Heather looked back at the empty space where Greg had left her. She thought about the empty apartment, the dead-end job, the constant feeling of being too much and yet not enough. She looked back at Viktor. I don't even know your name. Viktor, he said, and you are Heather. He had heard the officer say it, or perhaps he just knew. He shifted his stance, shielding her from the passing crowd. Walk with me, Heather. She took a breath, the air shuddering in her lungs, and made the choice that would shatter her life into a million pieces and reassemble it into something unrecognizable. "Okay," she whispered. Victor didn't smile. He wasn't a man who smiled often, but the corner of his eye tightened in satisfaction. He gestured to Anatoly, who immediately moved to clear a path. Victor kept his arm around her, guiding her not toward the commercial security checkpoints but toward a discreet side entrance reserved for diplomats and the ultra-wealthy. The walk to the tarmac was a blur. Heather was conscious only of the heat of Victor's body next to hers and the way the airport staff bowed their heads as he passed. They moved through a private security suite where no one asked for her ID. A nod from Victor was all the currency required. When the doors opened to the outside, the cold wind whipped Heather's hair across her face, but she didn't feel the chill. Before her sat a Gulfstream G650, a sleek silver bird resting on the tarmac, its engines already whining with a high-pitched hum. A set of stairs was lowered, bathed in soft LED lights. Victor paused at the bottom of the stairs. He turned to her, his large hand moving from her waist to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed away a lingering tear, his skin rough and warm against her softness. "Once you get on this plane," Victor told her, his voice serious, almost warning, "you are under my protection. That means your problems become my problems, and I solve problems very permanently." Heather shivered, looking into the depth of his eyes. She saw the danger there, the promise of violence, but for the first time in years she didn't feel like the victim. She felt chosen. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "I have nothing to go back to." "Good," Victor murmured, "then look forward." He guided her up the stairs. As Heather stepped into the cabin, the smell of jet fuel was replaced by the scent of rich leather and fresh orchids. The interior was unlike anything she had ever seen: cream-colored leather seats, mahogany tables, gold fixtures. It was a palace in the sky. Victor shrugged off his suit jacket, handing it to a stewardess who appeared from nowhere. He loosened his tie, the first sign of relaxation he had shown. He gestured to a plush seat by the window. "Sit," he commanded gently. "Drink, eat. We leave this country in 5 minutes." Heather sank into the leather seat, which seemed to swallow her whole. She watched as Victor sat opposite her, his long legs stretching out, his gaze never leaving her face. As the jet began to taxi, the engines roaring to life, Heather Jameson looked out the window at the receding terminal lights of New York. Somewhere back there was Greg. Somewhere back there was her old life. As the plane accelerated, pressing her back into the seat, she realized she hadn't just boarded a flight. She had boarded a new destiny. And the man sitting across from her, watching her with eyes that missed nothing, was the pilot of her fate. The jet lifted off, banking sharply into the dark night sky, heading east, toward Russia, toward danger, toward him. The hum of the Gulfstream's engines was a sedative, a low-frequency purr that vibrated through the floorboards and into the soles of Heather's feet, grounding her in a reality that felt entirely like a dream. The cabin was dimly lit, the harsh fluorescent glare of JFK replaced by warm amber recessed lighting that softened the edges of the mahogany trim and cream leather. Outside the oval windows, the Atlantic Ocean was a vast, invisible void, but inside, the air was still and scented with the faint, metallic tang of ozone and expensive cologne. Heather sat frozen in the oversized captain's chair, her hands still clutching the armrest as if she expected the floor to drop out from beneath her. She was acutely aware of her own disarray. Her hair was a tangled mess from the humidity and stress. Her oversized gray cardigan felt cheap and scratchy against the pristine leather, and the tear tracks on her cheeks had dried into tight, itchy lines. Across the narrow aisle, Viktor Baranov was a study in controlled relaxation. He had removed his tie completely, undoing the top 2 buttons of his dress shirt to reveal a glimpse of dark hair and tanned skin. He held a crystal tumbler of amber liquid, his legs crossed at the ankle, watching her with an intensity that should have been unnerving but was instead strangely stabilizing. He was the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved around her. "You are shaking," Victor said. It was not a question. His voice was deep, cutting through the ambient drone of the jet. Heather looked down at her hands. They were indeed trembling, a fine motor tremor she couldn't suppress. I think the adrenaline is wearing off. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be a bother." "Stop," Victor commanded, though his tone lacked the harsh edge it had carried with the police officer. He leaned forward, placing his glass on the table between them with a deliberate clink. Do not apologize for existing, do not apologize for feeling, that is a habit of the weak and you are not weak. He pressed a button on the console beside him. A moment later, the stewardess, a poised woman named Alina with hair pulled back in a severe bun, appeared from the galley. She didn't look at Heather with judgment, only with the blank, professional efficiency of someone paid to ignore the irregularities of her employer's life. Alina, bring the medical kit and prepare the master suite, Victor ordered in Russian, though he switched to English for the final command. And find her something to wear, burn those clothes. Heather's eyes widened. Burn them, this is all I have. You have nothing, Victor corrected her, his gaze sweeping over her baggy sweater and worn leggings. Those clothes carry the scent of a man who left you behind. They carry the sweat of your fear. You will not wear fear in my presence. You will wear silk. Alina nodded and vanished. Victor stood up, his height seeming to fill the cabin. He extended a hand toward Heather. For a second she hesitated. The old Heather, the one who tried to shrink herself to fit into Greg's narrow expectations, would have refused. She would have insisted she was fine, that she didn't need anything. But that Heather had been left at Terminal 4. The woman on the jet reached out and took the Mafia boss's hand. His grip was calloused and dry, encompassing her smaller hand completely. He pulled her up with an effortless strength, guiding her toward the rear of the plane. They passed a lounge area with a plush velvet sofa and a large flat-screen monitor displaying the flight path, moving deeper into the private sanctum of the aircraft. He opened a door revealing a bathroom that was larger than the kitchen in her apartment. It featured gold fixtures, a rainfall shower, and stacks of thick white towels. Shower, Victor said, leaning against the door frame, crossing his arms. Wash the airport off you, wash him off you. When you come out, there will be food. Why are you doing this? Heather asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. She stood on the threshold of luxury, looking back at the man who was essentially kidnapping her, albeit willingly. You don't know me, I'm nobody, why save me? Victor's expression remained unreadable, his steel blue eyes darkening slightly. He stepped closer, invading her personal space until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, tilting her head back so she had to look at him. Because I saw a beautiful thing being broken by a careless child, he murmured, his voice a low rumble in his chest. I do not like waste, and I am a man who takes what he wants. In that moment, Heather, I wanted to ensure no one made you cry again. He dropped his hand and stepped back, the moment of intimacy snapping shut like a trap. Take your time, we have 9 hours to Moscow. He closed the door, leaving her alone in the silence. Heather turned to the mirror. The woman staring back looked haunted, dark circles under her eyes, skin pale beneath the tan, but there was something else there too, a spark, a survival instinct. She stripped off the clothes Greg had always hated, the baggy layers meant to hide the curves he called excessive, and stepped into the shower. The hot water was a revelation, pounding against her skin, washing away the grime of New York and the lingering feeling of Greg's grip on her arm. She scrubbed until her skin was pink, using soaps that smelled of sandalwood and oud. When she stepped out, drying herself with a towel that felt like a cloud, she found a neat pile of clothing on the vanity. It wasn't women's clothing. Victor obviously didn't keep a mistress's wardrobe on board, but rather a set of his own luxury loungewear. A pair of black cashmere drawstring pants and a heavy silk t-shirt. She pulled them on. The pants were long, pooling around her feet, and the shirt hung off one shoulder, but the fabric was exquisite. It felt like armor. She rolled the waistband of the pants and caught her reflection again. She looked small inside his clothes, but she also looked claimed. When she emerged from the bathroom, the cabin lights had been dimmed further. A table had been set with white linen, silver cutlery, and crystal. The smell of roasted meat and savory herbs filled the air. Victor was seated, reading a document on a tablet, but he looked up the moment she entered. His eyes traveled down her body, lingering on the way the silk shirt draped over her bust and the curve of her hips. There was no lewdness in his gaze, only a heavy, masculine appreciation that made her skin prickle. Better, he said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. Sit, eat. The meal was steak frite, simple but prepared with a perfection that spoke of a private chef. Heather realized she hadn't eaten since a stale bagel that morning. She ate with a hunger she tried to hide, but Victor pushed a basket of warm bread toward her, his eyes softening at the corners. You have an appetite, he noted approvingly. Good, I do not trust women who pick at their food. It shows a lack of passion for life. I didn't realize how hungry I was, Heather admitted, tearing off a piece of bread. Where I come from, stress usually kills your appetite. Where you come from is gone, Victor said, cutting his steak with precise surgical movements. You are going to Moscow. It is a hard city, a cold city, but it is honest. If it hates you, it tells you. If it loves you, it bleeds for you. And you, Heather asked, emboldened by the food and the strange safety of the cabin, do you bleed for it? Victor paused, his knife hovering over the plate. He looked at her, assessing her intellect. I am the one who makes others bleed, Heather. That is why I can sit here and drink wine while the world burns. My empire is built on the understanding that violence is a currency and I am the richest man in the room. It was a terrifying admission, spoken with the casual tone of a man discussing the weather. Heather should have been repulsed, she should have been terrified, but looking at his strong hands, the broad expanse of his shoulders, she felt a thrill shoot through her. He was a monster, yes, but he was currently using his claws to build a wall around her. What happens when we land? She asked softly. You will come to my home, Victor said. You will sleep, you will recover. I have people who will handle your paperwork, your identity. If after a week you wish to return to America, I will buy you a ticket and give you enough money to start over. But I do not think you will want to go. Why not? Victor took a sip of his drink, his eyes locking onto hers over the rim of the glass. Because you have tasted safety tonight, and once you have slept under the wing of a dragon, the open sky feels far too exposed. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of exhaustion. Victor didn't press her for conversation. He moved to the sofa and worked, allowing her to curl up in the oversized leather chair with a cashmere blanket. She watched him for a long time, the furrow of his brow as he read, the way his hand clenched into a fist when he saw something he didn't like on the screen. He was a man of immense power, carrying a weight she couldn't comprehend. Eventually, the rhythm of the jet lulled her into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the sensation of a change in pressure. The cabin was dark, save for the soft floor lighting. She sat up, disoriented, the cashmere blanket slipping from her shoulders. We are descending, Victor's voice came from the darkness. He was already suited up, his tie knotted perfectly, his jacket buttoned. He looked impeccable, as if he hadn't just spent 10 hours in the air. Look. He gestured to the window. Heather leaned over, pressing her forehead against the cool plexiglass. Below them, a sprawling galaxy of amber light stretched out against the black velvet of the Russian night. Moscow. It looked massive, an endless grid of glowing arteries pulsing in the dark. Snow was falling, visible as streaks of white in the plane's landing lights. It looks cold, she whispered. It is, Victor said, standing and moving to her side. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a shield. But you will not feel it. The landing was smooth, the Gulf Stream touching down on a private airstrip far removed from the commercial chaos of Sheremetyevo. As the plane taxied to a halt, Heather saw a convoy of 3 black armored SUVs waiting on the tarmac, their headlights cutting through the swirling snow. Men in dark coats stood by the vehicles, their breath plumbing in the air, assault rifles hanging loosely across their chests. The reality of her situation crashed into her. This wasn't just a rich businessman, this was a warlord. Victor saw her hesitation as the cabin door opened, letting in a blast of freezing air. He turned to her, blocking her view of the armed men. He unbuttoned his suit jacket and took it off, draping it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of him. It engulfed her, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Stay close to me, he murmured. Do not look at the men, look only at me. They descended the stairs into the biting Russian winter. The wind was a physical blow, icy and sharp, but Victor's arm was an iron band around her waist, propelling her forward. The men by the cars snapped to attention as Victor approached, their eyes fixed on the ground or the perimeter, never on him or the woman he sheltered. Anatoly opened the rear door of the middle SUV. The interior was sweltering hot, lined with black leather. Victor guided her inside and slid in next to her. The door slammed shut with the heavy, muted thud of bulletproof plating. Go, Victor commanded. The convoy tore off across the tarmac, exiting through a private gate and merging onto the highway. The drive into the city was a blur of motion. Heather watched the architecture change from industrial outskirts to the imposing, brutalist blocks of the Soviet era, and finally to the gleaming glass skyscrapers of the Moscow city district. Where are we going? Heather asked, clutching the lapels of his jacket. The Federation Tower, Victor answered, glancing at his phone. My home is the penthouse. It is the highest point in the city. From there, I can see everything coming. They arrived 20 minutes later, the SUV driving directly into a private underground garage that looked more like a bank vault. Security checkpoints were cleared with a wave of Victor's hand. They took a private elevator that rose so fast Heather's ears popped. When the door slid open, Heather audibly gasped. The penthouse was not a home, it was a fortress of glass and stone suspended in the clouds. The walls were floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic 360-degree view of Moscow burning bright in the night. The furniture was modern, low-profile and dark, Italian leather, black marble, brushed steel. It was beautiful, stark, and utterly masculine. It was a space designed for a king who ruled alone. Victor walked into the center of the room, tossing his phone onto a marble console. He turned to face her, the city lights framing him like a halo of electricity. "Welcome home, Heather," he said, the words heavy with possession. He walked over to a wall panel and pressed a button. Hidden mood lighting illuminated a hallway. "Anatoly has placed your bag in the guest suite. It is the room on the right. It has everything you need. The kitchen is fully stocked. You are free to move anywhere in this apartment." "And outside?" Heather asked, looking at the glass walls that separated them from the freezing wind. "The elevator requires a biometric scan," Victor said simply. "You cannot leave without me. This is for your safety. My enemies are real and they are always looking for a weakness. Until I know who you are to me and who you are to the world, you stay where I can protect you." The gilded cage, he hadn't hidden it. He had presented it to her with open hands. Heather looked at the door to the guest suite, then back at Victor. He looked tired now, the adrenaline of the travel fading to reveal the weary lines around his eyes. He looked lonely. "Thank you, Victor," she said softly, "for the clothes, for the flight, for saving me." Victor stared at her for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. He took a step toward her, and for a second she thought he might kiss her. The air between them crackled with a sudden, sharp tension, a magnetic pull that made her breath hitch. He raised a hand, his knuckles brushing her cheek, a touch so light it made her tremble. "Go to sleep, I Mishka/I," he whispered, the Russian endearment slipping out. "Tomorrow we will figure out what to do with you. Tonight you are safe." He turned and walked toward the opposite wing of the penthouse, disappearing into the shadows of his own empire. Heather stood alone in the center of the massive living room, wrapped in the coat of a mafia boss, looking out at the snowy city below. She was a prisoner, perhaps, a guest maybe, but as she tightened the jacket around herself, inhaling the scent of sandalwood and power, she realized that for the first time in years she wasn't looking for an exit. She was wondering what it would take to stay. She walked toward the bedroom he had given her, the door clicking shut softly behind her, sealing her into the world of Viktor Baranov. Time in the penthouse moved differently than it did in the world below. Up here, suspended in the glass clouds of the Federation Tower, days bled into nights in a seamless loop of gray skies and glittering city lights. 2 weeks had passed since Heather Jameson had stepped off the Gulf Stream and into Viktor Baranov's fortress, and in that time the woman who had shivered in a terminal at JFK had begun to shed her old skin. Victor had kept his word. He had provided everything. The morning after her arrival, a team of stylists had arrived, silent, efficient women who measured her curves with professional detachment and filled the walk-in closet of the guest suite with cashmere, silk, and wool. There were no more oversized sweaters to hide behind. The clothes were tailored to fit her, accentuating the waist she had always tried to conceal and the softness of her figure. At first, Heather had felt exposed, like an imposter playing dress-up in a queen's wardrobe. But as the days wore on, the reflection in the mirror began to change. The dark circles under her eyes faded, replaced by the glow of uninterrupted sleep and rich food. The fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a strange, quiet watchfulness. She saw Victor only in the mornings and late at night. He was a ghost in his own home, leaving before the sun fully breached the horizon and returning long after the city had settled into its frozen slumber. When he was there, he was intense, his presence filling the vast open spaces of the apartment. They ate dinner together at the long marble table, conversations that started as tentative exchanges about the food or the weather but slowly evolved into something deeper. He asked her about her books, her thoughts on art, her silence. He never asked about Greg. He seemed to understand that the wound was still too fresh to touch without causing pain. But the past has a way of finding cracks in even the highest walls. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was a bruising shade of purple, a storm rolling in from the steppes. Heather was in the living room, curled up on the massive leather sectional with a tablet Victor had given her. She had been avoiding the internet, afraid of what she might see, but boredom and a morbid curiosity had finally won out. She logged into her old email account, her fingers trembling slightly as she tapped in the password. The inbox flooded with notifications. spam, newsletters, bill reminders, and then, buried in the noise, 5 emails from Greg. The timestamps ranged from the day after he left her to just 3 hours ago. Heather felt her breath hitch, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She shouldn't open them. She knew she shouldn't. But her thumb hovered over the screen, and before she could stop herself, she clicked the most recent one. Subject: you serious? Body: I know you're reading this. You think you can just disappear? You owe me for the rent. You owe me for the ticket you wasted. I'm going to call the cops and tell them you stole my laptop. Don't think I won't. You're pathetic, Heather. You can't survive on your own. Crawl back here and maybe we can talk. The words were like physical blows. Pathetic. Crawl back. The familiar cadence of his cruelty washed over her, instantly transporting her back to the cramped apartment in Queens, to the feeling of being small, stupid, and dependent. The walls of the penthouse seemed to shrink. The luxury around her felt like a lie. She was just a runaway, a fraud hiding in a castle she didn't belong in. He has a way with words, this man. Heather gasped, dropping the tablet. It clattered onto the marble floor. She spun around to find Victor standing by the entrance of the living room. She hadn't heard the elevator. She hadn't heard him approach. He had shed his suit jacket and was unbuttoning his cuffs, his steel blue eyes fixed on the device on the floor. I wasn't, Heather stammered, scrambling to pick up the tablet, trying to hide the screen. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and sudden. I'm sorry. Victor walked over to her, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed, but not at her. He reached out and took the tablet from her shaking hands. He looked at the screen, reading the email with a stoic expression that betrayed nothing. Then he looked at Heather. Why do you apologize? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Because he insulted you, or because you let him inside these walls? I just wanted to see, Heather whispered, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to hold the pieces of her composure together. He says he's going to call the police. He says I stole his laptop. I didn't, Victor, I swear it's in the apartment on the desk. Victor swiped the screen off and tossed the tablet onto the sofa as if it were contaminated. He stepped closer, towering over her. I know you didn't steal it. Men like him accuse others of the crimes they commit themselves. He stole your confidence. He stole your time, and now he tries to steal your peace. He's right, though, she said, her voice breaking. I can't survive on my own. Look at me. I'm living off your charity. I'm useless. Victor's hand shot out, grasping her chin firmly, forcing her to look up at him. His fingers were warm and rough, his grip possessive. Stop it. I do not keep useless things, Heather, and this is not charity. Then what is it? She cried, the emotions spilling over. Why am I here? I'm just some girl you found at an airport. You have all this power, this money. What could you possibly want with me? Victor stared down at her, his eyes searching her face. The mask of the cold brat of a boss slipped, just a fraction, revealing something raw and ancient beneath. You think you are weak because you feel pain. You think you are broken because you bleed. Heather, I have surrounded myself with men who would kill their own mothers for a profit. I swim in a sea of sharks. Do you know how rare it is to find something pure, something that has been hurt but still refuses to become cruel? He let go of her chin but didn't step back. He walked to the liquor cabinet, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. Drink. It is cognac. It burns, but it helps. Heather took the glass, sipping the fiery liquid. It warmed her chest, steadying her nerves. Victor took a large swallow of his own, then turned to look out the window at the storm raging over Moscow. You asked me on the plane if I bleed for this city, Victor said quietly. I told you I make others bleed, but that was only half the truth. He turned back to her, unbuttoning his shirt halfway down his chest. He pulled the fabric aside. Heather's eyes widened. Across the expanse of his muscular, tan chest, a jagged, puckered scar ran from his left shoulder down to his ribs. It looked like the earth had been torn open. It was an old burn, hideous and violent, contrasting sharply with the perfection of the rest of him. 10 years ago, Victor said, his voice devoid of emotion, reciting a history he had visited 1,000 times. I was not the Paquin, my father was. We were leaving a restaurant in St. Petersburg, my mother, my younger sister, and me. I was 22. I had just graduated from university. I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things, not destroy them. Heather stepped closer, drawn by the horror and the intimacy of the confession. She reached out, her hand hovering inches from his chest. A car bomb, Victor continued. Remote detonation. It was meant for my father, but the blast wave, it is unpredictable. It took the back of the car where my mother and sister were sitting. My father died in the ambulance. I was thrown through a window. He looked down at the scar. I spent 6 months in a burn unit. Every time they changed the bandages, I screamed. But do you know what hurt more? Heather shook her head, tears silent on her cheeks now. No. The silence, Victor said. Waking up in a room where no one was waiting for me. I had family, uncles, cousins, but they were not mine. They were vultures waiting to see if the heir would die so they could pick the bones of the empire. I realized then that love is a weakness only if you cannot protect it. If you want to love, you must be the most dangerous thing in the world. So I killed the architect inside me. I became this. He buttoned his shirt, covering the scar, covering the vulnerability. I hunted them down, the men who planted the bomb, the men who ordered it. I did not use the police. I did not use lawyers. I used fire. I burned their world until there was nothing left but ash. And when I sat on the throne, I was alone. I have been alone for 10 years. He looked at her, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. So do not tell me you are useless, Heather. You are the first person in a decade who has looked at me and seen a man, not a target or a bank account. You are the only warm thing in this cold city. Heather set her glass down on the table. Her heart was aching, not for herself anymore, but for him. The monster she had feared was just a boy who had been forced to walk through fire. The connection between them, which had been a fragile thread, suddenly pulled tight, binding them together. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. You could not know, Victor said, but now you do. We are the same, you and I. We have both been abandoned. We have both been left behind by the people who were supposed to protect us. The difference is that I chose violence and you chose endurance. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He reached out, his hand cupping her face again, his thumb brushing her lower lip. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a magnetic tension that made it hard to breathe. Heather didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, craving the contact. Victor, she breathed. He lowered his head, his lips inches from hers. She could smell the cognac and the danger on him. I will handle Greg, he murmured. He will never bother you again, but you must promise me something. Anything, she said, and she meant it. Do not look back, he whispered. If you stay with me, you look only forward, because if you look back, you will see the things I have to do to keep you safe, and I do not want you to see that. Before their lips could meet, a sharp chime echoed through the room, the elevator alert. Victor froze, the tenderness vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, hard armor of the boss. He stepped back, his hand dropping to his side. He checked his watch. It was past 9. No one came up unannounced. The elevator doors slid open and Anatoly stepped out. The head of security looked grim, his usually stoic face tight with tension. He held a secure satellite phone in his hand. Viktor Ilyich, Anatoly said, his voice grave. He glanced at Heather, then switched to rapid-fire Russian. Victor listened, his jaw tightening, his eyes turning into shards of ice. He didn't interrupt. He simply absorbed the information, his posture shifting from relaxed to combat-ready. When Anatoly finished, Victor nodded once. English, Victor commanded. She stays. Anatoly hesitated, then nodded. It is the Volkovs. They have been sniffing around the flight logs from New York. They know you did not come back alone. They are asking questions at the airport. They want to know who the passenger was. Heather felt the blood drain from her face. The Volkovs. Victor turned to her. My rivals, the family that used to hold the territory I now control, they are always looking for leverage. And they think I'm leverage, Heather asked, her voice trembling. They think you are a weakness, Victor corrected her. They think I have brought home a pet that will distract me. They do not realize I have brought home a reason to sharpen my knives. He turned back to Anatoly. Lock down the building, level 4 security protocols. No one comes in or out without my direct biometric authorization, and send a team to New York. Find Greg. Victor, no, Heather said, grabbing his arm. Don't hurt him, just stop him. Victor looked at her hand on his arm, then up at her eyes. He sent an email threatening you. He has made himself a player in the game. I cannot allow loose ends. He will be handled. He will not be killed if that is what you ask, but he will wish he had never learned to type. He turned away, walking toward his office, his voice barking orders at Anatoly. Get the council on the line. If Volkov wants to peek into my windows, I will blind him. Heather stood alone in the living room again, the storm raging outside matching the sudden chaos inside. The romantic haze of the cognac and the confession had been shattered by the cold reality of Victor's world. She was no longer just a guest, she was a target. But as she watched Victor through the glass walls of his office, packing like a caged tiger, speaking words of war into the phone, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of him, she was afraid for him. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that she wouldn't leave. She had entered the dragon's lair, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The elevator doors closed on Anatoly, sealing them in. The war had arrived at their doorstep, and Heather Jameson was standing on the front line. The storm outside the Federation Tower had intensified, turning the panoramic view of Moscow into a swirling abyss of gray turbulence and lashing snow. But inside Victor's office, the atmosphere was frozen in a terrifying stillness. Heather stood by the heavy oak door, her hand resting on the cool metal handle, watching the man she had begun to fall for dismantle a human life with the casual indifference of someone filing paperwork. Victor sat behind his desk, a slab of black marble that looked like an altar to capitalism. He was speaking into a secure phone, his voice devoid of anger, which made it infinitely more frightening. He was not shouting, he was not threatening, he was simply issuing instructions to a faceless subordinate on the other side of the world. "Freeze the assets," Victor said, his tone flat. "All of them. The checking account, the savings, the 401k, flag them for suspicious activity related to international wire fraud. It will take the IRS 6 months to clear him. By then, he will be starving." Heather felt a chill run down her spine. He was talking about Greg. Victor listened for a moment, then continued. "Contact his landlord, buy the building if you have to, but I want him evicted by noon tomorrow. Use the clause regarding criminal investigation. And the job, yes, send the photos to his HR director, the ones from his cloud storage. He will be fired for cause before he can unlock his office door." He paused, his steel blue eyes flicking up to meet Heather's across the room. He didn't look away as he delivered the final blow. "Ensure he knows why this is happening. Tell him he took something that belonged to the Baranov interest. And tell him if he ever speaks the name Heather Jameson again, I will stop being a businessman and start being a butcher." Victor ended the call and set the phone down gently. The silence that followed was deafening. Heather walked into the room, her legs feeling unsteady. She had wanted Greg to leave her alone. She had wanted him to feel a fraction of the helplessness he had inflicted on her at JFK. But this was total annihilation. Victor hadn't just protected her, he had erased Greg's existence from the societal map. "You destroyed him," Heather whispered, stopping in front of the desk. "I removed an obstacle," Victor corrected, leaning back in his leather chair. The shadows of the room played across his sharp features, making him look more like a dark god than a man. "He threatened you. He tried to use fear to control you. I simply showed him that there are fears much greater than a missed rent payment." "Is that what you do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You just delete people." Victor stood up, walking around the desk to stand before her. The power radiating off him was palpable, a physical weight in the air. "I protect what is mine, Heather. In my world, hesitation is death. Mercy is a luxury I cannot afford. You are living in the penthouse of a man who heads an organization that governments classify as a threat. Did you think I was a saint?" "No," she said, looking up into his eyes. "I knew you were dangerous, I just didn't realize how far your reach went." "My reach has no end," Victor said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "And that is why you need to understand the choice you are making." He reached out, taking her hands in his. His grip was firm, grounding her. "The Volkovs are circling, they know you are here, they know I have brought a woman into my sanctuary, which makes you a target. They will not stop until they find a way to use you against me." "So what happens now?" Heather asked. "Do you send me away? Do you buy me a ticket to somewhere safe?" "I could," Victor admitted. "I could send you to a private island in the Caribbean. I could give you $5 million and a new identity. You would be safe, you would be free, you would never have to look over your shoulder again." He paused, and for the first time Heather saw a crack in his composure. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles, a nervous, telling gesture. "But if you go, I cannot follow. I belong to this city. I belong to the war." Heather looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the scars he hid beneath his tailored suits, the loneliness that echoed in this empty glass castle, the ferocity with which he had defended her honor against a man who wasn't even worth his time. If she left, she would be safe, yes, but she would be alone again. She would be returning to a world that had chewed her up and spit her out, a world where men like Greg existed and men like Victor were just fantasies. "And if I stay?" she asked softly. Victor's expression hardened, intense, and serious. If you stay, there is no going back. You become part of the family. You become part of me. It means living in a gilded cage. It means security details when you go shopping. It means knowing that the man you sleep next to has blood on his hands. It is a high price, Heather. Your freedom for my protection, your innocence for my world. He released her hands, giving her the physical space to retreat. I will not force you. I took you from the airport because you were in distress, but I will not keep a prisoner. If you stay, it must be because you want the monster, not just the castle. Heather didn't hesitate. The old Heather, the timid girl from Queens, would have run. She would have taken the money and fled. But that girl had died on the tarmac at JFK. The woman standing in Moscow knew what it felt like to be cherished, to be defended, to be seen. She stepped forward, closing the gap he had created. She reached up, her hands resting on the broad expanse of his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath the silk shirt. I don't want the island, she whispered. I don't want to be safe if it means being without you. You said you don't like waste, Victor. Sending me away would be a waste of everything we've started. Victor's breath hitched. A fire ignited in his eyes, a raw, possessive hunger that he had been holding back since the moment he saw her. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. The contact was electric, a sudden shock of heat that made her gasp. Are you sure? He growled, his voice rough. Because once I claim you, I will never let you go. You will be mine, Heather, today, tomorrow, until the day I die. I'm yours, she answered, the words feeling like a vow. I'm tired of being afraid. I want to burn the world down with you. Victor didn't speak again. He didn't need to. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her effortlessly out of the office and down the hallway toward the master suite, the room he had forbidden her from entering until now. The bedroom was a cavern of shadows and silk, dominated by a massive bed that looked out over the city. Victor set her down on the edge of the mattress, standing between her legs. The storm outside raged against the glass, but the storm inside was fiercer. He reached out and slowly, reverently began to undress her. There was no rush. Every touch was a claim, his hands memorizing the curves of her body, the softness of her skin that contrasted so sharply with his own roughness. When she was bare before him, Heather felt no shame, only a powerful sense of belonging. She reached for his belt, her fingers fumbling slightly with the buckle. Victor helped her, shedding his clothes with impatient efficiency until he stood before her, magnificent and scarred, a warrior stripped of his armor. He pressed her back against the sheets, his body covering hers, a heavy, comforting weight. He kissed her then, and it wasn't the chaste, tentative kiss of a first date. It was deep, demanding, and consuming. He tasted of power and desire. Heather wrapped her legs around him, pulling him closer, needing to feel every inch of him. Look at me, he commanded, his voice strained as he hovered over her. I want you to see who is loving you. She looked into his steel blue eyes, now dark with passion. I see you, Victor. He entered her slowly, watching her face, ensuring she was with him every step of the way. The sensation was overwhelming, a fullness that stretched her and filled the empty places in her soul. They moved together in a rhythm that was ancient and instinctive, the storm outside providing the soundtrack to their union. It was a consummation of the promise he had made, to protect her, to own her, to love her in the only way he knew how, completely and terrifyingly. When the crest came, it shattered them both. Heather cried out his name, her nails digging into his shoulders, anchoring herself as the world spun away. Victor buried his face in her neck, a groan torn from his throat that sounded like a surrender. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the room quiet save for their ragged breathing. Victor held her against his chest, his arm draped protectively over her, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. He was possessive even in sleep, his body curving around hers to shield her from the door. You are Baranov now, he whispered into her hair, the declaration sounding like a legal decree. Let Volkov come, let them all come, I will kill them all before they touch a hair on your head. Heather closed her eyes, listening to his heartbeat. She knew he meant it. She knew the danger was real. But lying there in the arms of the most dangerous man in Moscow, she felt a peace she had never known in her safe, suburban life. She had paid the price, her normalcy, and in return, she had received a kingdom. The morning brought a cold, hard light and a reality check. Heather woke alone in the massive bed. The space beside her was cold, but the scent of Victor lingered on the pillows. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her just as the door opened. Elena walked in carrying a tray of coffee and fruit, followed closely by Victor. He was dressed in a tuxedo, sharp and immaculate. He looked like he was ready for a coronation. He walked over to the bed, sitting on the edge and placing a hand on her knee. "You slept well?" he asked, his eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "I did," she smiled, reaching for his hand. "Where are you going? You look official." Victor corrected her, "We are going." He signaled to Alina, who placed a long black velvet garment bag on the foot of the bed. "Tonight is the winter gala at the Kremlin," Victor explained. "Every major oligarch, politician, and crime lord in Russia will be there. It is neutral ground, a place where alliances are made and broken." Heather felt a spike of anxiety. "And you want me to go with the Volkovs there?" "Especially with the Volkovs there," Victor said, his face hardening. "Hiding you makes you look like a weakness. It makes it look like I am ashamed or afraid. Tonight we change the narrative. Tonight I walk in with you on my arm. I present you as my partner. It tells them that I am not afraid to show you because I am confident in my ability to destroy anyone who looks at you the wrong way." He stood up and unzipped the bag. Inside hung a gown of emerald green silk, floor-length and backless, structured to hug every curve she possessed. It was a weapon in the form of a dress. "The Volkovs sent a message this morning," Victor said, his voice dropping. "They tried to hack the flight logs again. They are getting desperate. They want to know who is in my tower." He leaned down, kissing her forehead. "Get dressed, Heather. It is time to show them the queen." Heather looked at the dress, then at the man who had reshaped her world. The fear was there, fluttering in her stomach, but it was drowned out by a newfound steel. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the woman of Viktor Baranov. "Okay," she said, sliding out of bed and standing tall, not bothering to cover her nudity. She walked to the dress, running her hand over the silk. "Let's go to the Kremlin." Victor watched her, a dark smile playing on his lips. He had made the right choice. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a natural. But as Heather disappeared into the bathroom to prepare for her debut, Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from Anatoly. "Security breach at the perimeter. 2 men apprehended, Volkov lieutenants. They were carrying layout schematics of the penthouse." Victor's hand crushed the phone tight. The enemy wasn't just circling anymore, they were at the gate. The gala wasn't just a party, it was going to be a trap, and he was walking Heather straight into the lion's den. He deleted the message and straightened his tie. He would not tell her, not yet. Tonight she needed to feel invincible. Tonight he would have to be enough of a monster for both of them. The Grand Kremlin Palace was a monument to centuries of absolute power. A sprawling complex of gold leaf, red velvet, and white stone that had survived czars, commissars, and presidents. Tonight stood illuminated against the driving Moscow snow, its golden domes glowing like embers in the dark. Inside the armored Mercedes Maybach, the silence was heavy, filled only by the rhythmic thrum of the wipers and the rapid beating of Heather's heart. She smoothed the fabric of the emerald green silk gown over her thighs. The dress was a masterpiece of construction, backless and plunging, clinging to her curves like a second skin. It made her feel exposed yet armored. Beside her, Victor was a shadow in the dim light. He had been silent since they left the penthouse, his eyes scanning the perimeter through the tinted bulletproof glass. He held her hand, his grip tight enough to bruise, a constant reminder that he was there, that he was ready. "You are quiet," Victor said, his voice low, breaking the tension. He didn't look at her, his gaze was fixed on the security checkpoint ahead. "I'm terrified," Heather admitted, turning to look at his profile. The streetlights carved his face into sharp relief, the scar of the past hidden beneath the crisp white collar, the brutality of the present hiding behind the tuxedo. "You said everyone in that room is a killer or a thief." "They are," Victor turned to her then, his steel blue eyes locking onto hers. "But they are wolves who know their place, and tonight they will learn yours. You are not prey, Heather. You are with the apex predator. Do not lower your eyes for anyone. If they look at you, you look back until they turn away." The car rolled to a stop at the VIP entrance. Anatoly opened the door, the freezing wind rushing in for a split second before Victor stepped out. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and extended a hand to her. As she stepped out into the flashing bulbs of the paparazzi and the scrutiny of the security detail, the cold air bit at her exposed skin, but Victor immediately pulled her into his side, his body heat a furnace against the chill. They ascended the grand staircase, entering the Georgievsky Hall. The scale of the room was breathtaking. Massive chandeliers the size of small cars, white marble walls inscribed in gold with the names of military heroes, and a floor of intricate parquet that had borne the weight of history's heaviest boots. The air smelled of expensive perfume, ozone, and the metallic tang of chilled vodka. The moment they crossed the threshold, the hum of conversation faltered. Hundreds of eyes turned toward them. Heather felt the weight of the scrutiny physically, 1,000 invisible needles pricking her skin. She felt the urge to shrink, to hide behind Victor's broad shoulder as she would have done with Greg. But then she remembered the apartment. She remembered the way Victor had looked at her this morning. "You are Baranov now." She lifted her chin, inhaling a sharp breath, and met the gaze of a woman in diamonds who was staring at her with undisguised judgment. The woman blinked first and looked away. "Good," Victor whispered in her ear, his hand warm on the small of her back. "They smell the fear, give them none." They moved through the crowd like a ship breaking ice. Victor nodded to associates, ignored rivals, and introduced Heather simply as Heather, with a tone that dared anyone to ask for a surname or a pedigree. She saw the calculations in their eyes. They were assessing her value, her influence, her vulnerability. "Victor Ilyich," a voice grated out, smooth and oily like old engine grease. Victor stopped. The crowd around them seemed to evaporate, leaving a sudden, widening circle of empty space. Standing before them was a man in his 60s with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that were black voids. He was flanked by 3 younger men who looked less like bodyguards and more like executioners. "Dmitri," Victor acknowledged, his voice dropping to a subterranean rumble. He didn't offer a hand. "I see they are letting anyone in these days." Dmitri Volkov smiled, revealing a row of silver-capped teeth. This was the enemy. This was the man who had sent agents to map their home. "It is a public gala, Victor, even for those of us with outdated territories. And who is this exquisite creature? A new acquisition from the West." Dimitri's eyes raked over Heather, lingering on her chest and the curve of her hips with a lasciviousness that made her skin crawl. "American, yes, she looks soft, fragile, not built for our winters." "She is built for whatever I require," Victor said, stepping slightly forward, angling his body to shield her while leaving his hands free. "And she is not an acquisition. She is my companion. You will address her with respect or you will not address her at all." Dmitri chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Touchy, you know, Victor, I heard a rumor today. A little bird told me you left your nest unguarded to come here. A penthouse is a high place to fall from." It was a taunt, a confession. Victor's eyes narrowed. "My nest has teeth, Dmitri. Anyone who climbs that tower will find only a quick way down." "Perhaps," Dmitri shrugged. "But while we are here drinking champagne, business continues. Why don't we step into the Blue Room, a private toast, to settle old debts?" It was a trap. It was clumsy, arrogant, and obvious. But in this world, refusing a parley at a neutral event was a sign of weakness. "Heather stays here," Victor said. "Nonsense," Dmitri insisted, his gaze flickering to Heather. "The lady should see how business is done unless you do not trust her with your secrets." Victor looked at Heather. He could leave her here with Anatoly safe in the crowd, but Dmitri was baiting him, implying he was afraid. And if Dmitri had men here, the crowd wasn't safe. The safest place for her was exactly where Victor could reach her. "Come," Victor said to her, extending his elbow. They followed the Volkov faction out of the main hall and down a velvet-lined corridor to a private antechamber reserved for high-level discussions. The heavy oak doors closed behind them, shutting out the music and the chatter. The room was silent, thick with the smell of cigar smoke. As soon as the doors clicked shut, the atmosphere shifted from diplomatic to lethal. Dmitri turned, the smile dropping from his face. His 3 men fanned out, hands reaching inside their jackets. "You took my port shipments last month, Victor," Dmitri spat, his veneer of civility gone. "You squeezed my operations in St. Petersburg. You think you are the czar. You are just a boy who got lucky with a bomb." "I earned my city," Victor said calmly. He didn't reach for a weapon. He stood perfectly still, his body relaxed, his awareness expanding to fill the room. "And you are a dinosaur, Dmitri. You don't know when to go extinct." "I think I will take back what is mine," Dmitri sneered. He looked at Heather. "Starting with the girl, she will make a fine leverage piece once we—" He never finished the sentence. The violence was not like the movies. It was not a choreographed dance. It was an explosion of brutal, efficient motion. Victor moved before Dimitri's men could clear their holsters. He didn't go for a gun. He closed the distance to the nearest guard in a blur of black fabric. There was a sickening crack of bone as Victor's palm struck the man's throat, collapsing his windpipe. The guard went down, gargling, dropping his weapon. The second guard drew a pistol, but Anatoly, who had slipped in silently behind them, put a single suppressed round through the man's temple. The thwip sound was ridiculously quiet, but the result was messy. The third guard hesitated, his eyes wide. That hesitation cost him his life. Victor spun, a knife appearing in his hand from a sheath hidden in his sleeve, a karambit with a curved blade. He slashed upward, severing the tendons in the guard's wrist, then drove the blade into the man's chest. It was over in 6 seconds, 3 men down. The smell of copper and bowels filled the small luxury room. Dmitry Volkov stood alone, his face pale, his eyes bulging. He fumbled for a weapon in his waistband, his hands shaking. Victor didn't rush him. He stepped over the body of the first guard, wiping the blade of his knife on a silk handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. He looked like a demon, his eyes devoid of humanity, focused entirely on the destruction of the threat. "I told you," Victor said, his voice terrifyingly even. "She is not for you." "Victor, wait," Dmitry stammered, backing up against the ornate fireplace. "We can negotiate, territory, roots, anything." "You threatened my home," Victor said, taking another step. "You threatened her." Heather stood by the door, frozen. Her hands were pressed over her mouth, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. She was watching a murder. She was watching the man who had held her tenderly in bed the night before butcher people with the efficiency of a machine. She should be screaming, she should be running. But she wasn't. She looked at Dmitry Volkov, the man who had looked at her like a piece of meat, who had planned to kidnap her, torture her, use her. And then she looked at Victor. He wasn't enjoying it. There was no sadism in his eyes. It was duty. It was protection. He was burning the world down to keep the cold away from her. Victor lunged. Dmitry tried to fire, but Victor caught his wrist, twisting it until it snapped. With his other hand, Victor drove the knife into Dmitry's heart. He held the older man as he died, staring into his eyes until the light faded. Victor let the body slide to the floor. The silence returned, heavier than before. Victor stood there, his chest heaving slightly, blood on his white shirt, blood on his hands. He looked at the carnage, then slowly, hesitantly, he turned to look at Heather. His eyes were filled with a terrible fear, not fear of the law or the Volkovs, but fear of her. He expected her to recoil. He expected her to see the monster and run. "Heather," he croaked, his voice raw, "do not look." Heather lowered her hands from her mouth. She stepped forward, her heels clicking on the blood-spattered parquet. She didn't look at the bodies. She looked only at him. She walked right up to him, ignoring the gore on his suit. She reached out and took his blood-stained hand in hers. "I'm looking," she whispered. "I see you, Victor." Victor trembled. "I am a killer. This is my life. This is what I bought for you." "You killed them because they were going to hurt us," Heather said, her voice gaining strength. She reached up with her clean hand and cupped his jaw, forcing him to look at her. "You didn't do this for fun. You did this for me. I'm not afraid of you, Victor. I'm afraid of a world without you." Victor let out a ragged breath, dropping his forehead to rest against hers. The tension drained out of him, replaced by a fierce, desperate gratitude. "I will never let anyone touch you. I swear it on my blood." "I know," she said. "Now take me home." Anatoly was already on the radio, calling for the cleaners and the extraction team. They exited through a service door, leaving the bodies for the cleanup crew that was already on the payroll of the venue. They walked out into the snow, the cold air cleansing the metallic scent of death from their lungs. Back in the car, Victor didn't let go of her hand. He cleaned the blood from his fingers with a wet wipe, but he couldn't wash away what had happened. Yet Heather didn't pull away. She leaned her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. She had made her choice. She had walked through the fire and found that she didn't burn. She belonged to the dragon. Epilogue 1 year later. The snow was falling again in Moscow, coating the city in a blanket of pristine white. From the terrace of the Federation Tower penthouse, the world looked quiet, peaceful. Heather stood by the glass railing, wrapped in a sable coat that cost more than the house she had grown up in. Her hair was longer now, styled in loose waves, and she wore diamond studs in her ears. She held a steaming mug of tea, watching the traffic crawl far below. She wasn't the same woman who had cried at JFK. That woman was a memory, a ghost left behind in America. The woman who stood here now spoke fluent Russian, sat on the board of 3 major art charities, and knew how to disassemble and clean a Sig Sauer pistol, though Victor swore she would never have to use it. The glass door behind her slid open. Victor stepped out, bringing the warmth of the apartment with him. He was dressed in a suit as always, but he looked different. The lines of exhaustion around his eyes had softened. The perpetual tension in his shoulders had eased. He was still the king of Moscow, still the most dangerous man in the city, but he was no longer alone. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You will catch a cold, Dusha." "I like the snow," Heather said, leaning back into him. "It covers everything, makes it look new." "Greg was found," Victor said softly. He didn't need to elaborate, they rarely spoke the name. "And?" Heather asked, feeling nothing but a distant curiosity. "He is working in a warehouse in Ohio. He lives in a basement. He drinks too much. He is nobody." "He was always nobody," Heather said. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I don't care about him, Victor. I have everything I need right here." Victor smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I have been waiting for the right moment," he said, "but in our life there are no right moments, there is only now." He opened the box. Inside sat a diamond that was almost obscene in its size, a flawless blue stone that matched his eyes, set in platinum. "Marry me," Victor said. "Bind yourself to me legally, spiritually, irrevocably. Be the tsaritsa of this city." Heather looked at the ring, then at the man. She thought about the violence, the fear, the gilded cage. And then she thought about the safety, the passion, the way he worshipped the ground she walked on. She thought about the way he had reshaped his entire empire to ensure her happiness, moving legitimate businesses to the forefront, pushing the darkness to the edges where it couldn't touch her. She had been abandoned at an airport, left for dead by a coward, and she had been picked up by a king who would burn the world to keep her warm. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, Victor." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He kissed her deep and slow as the snow fell around them, sealing them in their tower. Below them, Moscow continued to churn, a city of wolves and winters, but up here in the clouds they were untouchable.